Namaskar and welcome to this exciting new episode of Sattology Debunking Mythology. And today we are covering a very, very important topic. And I have a very special guest joined from India. I've been waiting for him for a very long time, and today he has agreed to come on the show. Uh, and he is well spoken on many matters pertaining to military and also strategic affairs. And he has also published some books, which I'm going to ask him now. So, so without delay, let us welcome General Dhruv Katoch. Welcome very much. Welcome a lot to the
Thank you,
Sattology.
Aditya.
So one of the things which really inspired me when I was looking at your different shows was that you very much stick to the point and you do not, and you become silent after that. And then you're listening to other people and the TV shows I've seen. So before I start off with anything, we would like to know about you, that what inspired you, and because many people in the US, they join military, serve for some time, and they leave. And you can't recognize ever that they were living a very disciplined life in the military. But you had a long, distinguished career with the Indian Armed Forces. So what inspired you to continue so that the young students can get inspired to serve their own countries?
For this particular question, I think everybody will have a different set of answers. But for me, it had much to do with the family tradition. It started off with my grandfather, who joined the British Indian Army in 1880 or so, and then he served in the British Indian Army, and he fought the First World War, and he was decorated with the Military Cross for heroism in battle. Then my father joined the army, and we were from the same regiment, the Dogra regiment. That is the one which I belonged to. And my father fought in the first war, which we fought with Pakistan, the 47-48 war. And then from my village, there are a whole range of people who, since independence, have fought in every single operation which the Indian Army has conducted till date. And now I have my nephews who are in the brigadier's rank, So it has been a long tradition. It has been a continuous tradition of over 125 years. So for me, it was something, perhaps it was very natural to join the army. I will put it that way. But there is also a sense of commitment. You see, especially from the area where I come from, you will find in Himachal, which is a mountainous region, people take to the army like a duck takes to water. There is a huge family tradition behind it, and they do their bit of service, whatever time they have. Then they come back to the village and they work. So I think I belong to that same breed, and that perhaps has been my motivation. I've been in the service, if I include my training period, for about 40 years now. And post-retirement, I'm into the think tank business. So I continue my association with the Indian Armed Forces and with the strategic community.
You mentioned the word think tanks here, and sometimes many Americans think the think tanks the think portion has left the think tanks. Only the tanks have remained in the Washington, D.C. today. So the think tank culture is become very elitist in the USA right now, but other countries we don't know. Probably in India must be very flourishing. What is your viewpoint about the think tank culture in the DC itself?
You see, we in India, I've always looked up to the think tanks which have come from the United States, very frankly, because the amount of research which has gone into there, I thought was of a very high order. It is not something which you see generally. And what I really liked about the US think tanks was that regardless of, because there are political affiliations, we understand that. They could be pro-Democrats or they could be pro-Republicans. But ultimately, those think tanks, they are pro the United States. There is absolutely no doubts about that. They are looking into American national interest. And I think they do that role pretty well. In India, the think tank culture is still developing. I think we've got a long way to go before we reach the standards of the United States. And if the US citizens are disappointed with what their think tanks are producing, that has really come as a surprise to me. because most of the world holds up the US think tanks as a model. I've also seen the work of think tanks which come from, from China and from Russia. Most of it is actually dedicated to supporting the party line, and that makes it that really doesn't make it a think tank. It makes it something like a propaganda piece. And while I understand that every country think tanks will have an element of propaganda in it, I think the think tanks from the US present a much wider view. And for any discerning people like me who's been in this for a long time, I can understand where that propaganda is, and it is very convenient to sift it out. But the mass of data which is available, I think it enables us to form a very good impression of what is happening, especially as far as the background details are concerned.
The one of the things which comes out to be recently, like as the in the US, I'm talking about the academic circles, students in the circles, and generally people think of think tanks as an administration voice. Generally, is the voice of the intelligence agencies, is the voice of the State Department, and generally that's how they view it in the American context here. And they try to tell things which are most Americans don't know, because what they study in the school texts are different than what is in the think tank. Think tank deals with the real issues and with the live data feed. So what is your when the in the role of India as it is growing now internationally with the Global South Summit and the more pronouncements on the BRICS side? Now, how does you think the US think tank monitors that kind of role of India?
You see, when we are looking at India, we have got a large number of people working in various think tanks. Like Brookings is located in India; it's in Delhi, right? And they express their views. So there is absolutely no problem in any think tank expressing their views. As far as when you're looking at issues as India coming as part of the global South, as far as BRICS is concerned, or even let us take it the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, there was a particular type of coverage which has come from the United States, and I can understand that because the US is fighting that war. It is supporting the Ukrainians and as part of the NATO effort. So we understand where that is coming from. But that has really not influenced think tanks in India because Americans are doing it. That must be right. Here we have got independent voices, and you will find that when we come to certain issues, especially like the war in Russia, the war in Ukraine, the Indian voices are we have two types of voices. One is reasonably critical of what the Americans are doing there and NATO is doing there, and one is reasonably critical of what the Russians are doing there. But importantly, most of the voices in India which are coming pertaining to that war have given very strong reasons why India is not directly impacted. You see, we have got no skin in the pudding, as we call it, skin in the game, as far as that war is concerned. And there is no reason for us to get involved in a European war. And that opinion has become solidified as far as India is concerned. Similarly, when we look at the American views on things like the BRICS summit, or even of India being part of various organizations in which Russia is there. And when the Chinese and the Russians look at India's being part of the Quad, now both of them, they get quite confused as to how can you stand on two separate legs, you see, when the groupings are different. But the point is, what people have to understand now is India doesn't have to be part of any group. India is in a standalone mode. We will do what is in India's interest, the way the United States has been very consistent and focused in doing what is perceived to be in the best interest of the United States. And I think that is a very fair thing as far as the US is concerned. And this is what India is doing. And whether the world accepts it or not doesn't really matter. We will continue on that path. So that is as far as the Indian think tanks, the way we perceive it. But I totally understand when America discusses an issue, there is enough knowledge here in India to determine which way everybody looks at a particular problem. I will certainly not fall for Russian propaganda or Chinese propaganda. And I think we are smart enough now not to fall for propaganda which is even coming from the West. We will form our own opinions.
Yeah, I mean, India is like if you look at the population you just mentioned, is is twice the population of the entire West put together, twice. And so it's naturally they have a larger pool of people to take care. And naturally, it's a very civilizational state that is being used by the Indian diplomatic circles more and more now. It's a civilizational state. And the civilizational state also means that we have a long history of decisions from Cholas, Chalukyas, Pallavas, and Pandyas in the South Indian kings, and also the Mahabharata itself, where we see the information trickling down to Chanakya's Arthashastra and other places. So, what role do that information plays in the strategic mindset of India?
You see, Aditya, many people have actually made a statement that India lacks a strategic culture. I think they were really missing the point. India doesn't lack a strategic culture. We just didn't have the strength to express our view or our will. You see, strategic cultures only matter if you are strong. So when India had been subjugated for many years, right since the Muslim invasions began, and then the Brits came here for 2 centuries or so, you really didn't have the strength to express what we call a strategic culture. But now that you're getting stronger again, I think there is a very sincere effort to look back into our roots and to correct the various distortions that have been made in our history. The history of India, when we are looking at it, has been very North India specific and specific to a few dynasties. The very rich history of South India, of East India, or especially the Ahom kings in Assam, they got a complete whitewash. If you actually study at the naval, you spoke of the Cholas. I mean, if Cholas had been part of the Western Bloc, they would have been compared to people like Napoleon.
That's right.
Now, we don't, it is something very strange. You simply eliminated all this history from our books. And because it was eliminated from the books, it became eliminated from our consciousness. People have been surprised that if you may or may not have heard of the name of a general called Zorawar Singh, who with a limited force actually captured Ladakh and went across to Tibet. Now, if anybody studies his exploits, that will put Napoleon to shame. Had he been a Westerner, Napoleon would have been called the Zorawar, the French Zorawar. Now, for some reason, our history has not really reflected what our civilizational ethos was. But now that is coming up, and there is a very large interest, especially amongst the youth, the little boys and girls, the people who are in class 5 and class 6, then going up to class 10 and 12, and then getting on to college. There is a great deal of interest to actually get back into our history. And that history is now, it is not being rewritten. It is actually emerging about as to what had been written earlier. Those texts are really being brought out. The older texts, which were in original, they are being translated. And it is giving people a perspective. You see, India has been a civilizational state for many, many thousands of years. So that is something which we need to understand. And while we've had a bad run for a very long time, I think those days are over. The Indian masses, while we are still poor, yes, if we compare ourselves to the United States or to China or to most of the European countries, we are very, very far as economics is concerned from coming up to that level. But things are changing. And one thing which you see in India today, it is a very aspirational India. It is something which is unbelievable. And some of the achievements which we have done in the last 5 years, I'm afraid even the West hasn't caught up, especially in the manner in which the humblest of Indians, the person who is selling pan puri on the streets, the poorest of India's poor, the maids who work in your house, the way they use the mobile cell phone and transact cash transactions, it is unbelievable. So there is a change coming about, and I have a feeling that within the next decade or so, the picture which people will get of India will be totally different to what they see now. We have got a very positive image now. I understand that positive image didn't exist about 20 to 30 years back. But that image is changing. And I think now when we go on to the next decade, we will be looked on as a power which is a power for the good. We covet nobody else's land. We don't intend to sort of go and tell the world how they should live, but we will tell them this is the way we live, and we are proud of living this way. I think what we are really seeing is an acceptance of our identity, and that acceptance, a very large number of our people who went to the West, to the United States, and to Britain and other countries, they try to suppress that identity and take on the identity of the host country. Now, there's nothing wrong in being patriotic and getting on to that, but to sort of denigrate your own just because you have gone somewhere else, not for any other reason, but for lack of knowledge, I think was not really appropriate. And I hope in due course of time, those individuals themselves realize where they have gone wrong. And while being loyal citizens of their country, learn to appreciate the civilizational ethos and the cultural ethos of the country they came from.
If you read American textbooks, and American textbooks never show the failures of the American military or the American heroes in any sphere, including Vietnam War, including wars where they have significantly lost. But the good parts of those wars are taught to the children. And even today, the veterans from the Vietnam War are celebrated. Many highways are named after them, even whatever the outcome of the war is. And even a small mediocrity is made into a celebrity in the Western parlance. And somehow the American universities play a good role in that, where they explain mediocrity in a good way. But there is a environment in the academic circles which goes in internationally, that when you subscribe to an American university viewpoint, then they have to analyze everything from a European or American perspective. And that creates, nowadays, that is creating problem in African Union, creating problem in South America, and also creating problem in India as well. Where India itself is a continent in itself with the amount of people we have. So if you look at that kind of education system, when it conveys a very strong Europeocentric view, like many things which were debunked by Indian philosophers, Indian authors, I have debunked it in my book, the Aryan invasion theory and other things, we have debunked it completely. That could not be possible, scientifically not possible. So when you face that kind of onslaught, there is no parallel Indian view. I mean, people like you who are very accomplished and knowledgeable, you can communicate your point very forcefully, but it doesn't happen on the ground even today. We don't see an Indian academic challenging a viewpoint that Alexander invaded India. Alexander did come to Indian borders through Afghanistan and to today's Pakistan, but did not come today's India, but did come to India when it was undivided. What is your viewpoint on that?
You see, as I told you in my opening remarks, for a very long time, our history was suppressed. And if you look into the history of what happened since the East India Company moved in, and then, of course, the entire period of British rule, what happened there? And then when we achieve independence, what happened post-independence? I think our own ideas, our thoughts were captured in a sense, but the leftist lobby, which was very prevalent in India, they got hold of our educational establishment. And they continued with a certain thought process, which was antithetical to our civilizational and cultural ethos. And it has remained like that for many decades. The Americans, I think, when you look into America's history, I think one thing which the US has done right, the way I look at it at least is, they have actually, within their youth or within their society, they have inculcated a sense of pride in what America is. And I think that is a very important aspect. You see, I grew up, I was born in 1951, and I grew up in those years. And in my young school days, in the 50s and the 60s, when I was in school, everything which we read of American literature, we appreciated. In a sense, you can actually say I, as a young kid, was brainwashed into thinking that whatever America does is right. Now, that was the power of the American narrative. That was the power of the European narrative. And in India, we didn't have a narrative to counter any narrative. I'm not saying we need to counter the American or the European narrative. All that I'm saying is we needed to build our own, and we didn't build it. Now that happened. That I think was a very that, in my view, was a weakness as far as the Indian system was concerned. Our own education system was concerned. And then what happened is that the scholars which we produced, a large number of these scholars went to Russia for their for training, and the Russians encouraged them. So they got a particular socialist bent of mind, and these were the people who were also being promoted in India. And a very large number of these scholars then found their way to the United States and Europe, and they became the voices of India. Now, I'm afraid they were not really reflecting what the Indian story should be or what the Indian narrative should be, but that is what they reflected. Now, a change is coming about. The people who are going to the States, who are going to Europe, they are actually, a very large number of books have come out. You have written on the subject. There are others who have written on the subject. And while this writing is still not comparable to what has been produced by the earlier narrative, those people are still writing much more than what this particular narrative is stating. But now at least there are two views. There are two narratives. In fact, there are multiple narratives. And for the first time, the Indian public or the Indian intellectual has a choice to choose, and a choice to choose based on logic. You spoke of the Aryan and the Dravidian, the theory. Now, these theories are deliberately cast to tell the Indians that, listen, you are nobody. You were ruled earlier. Even the Aryans who came here were foreigners, they ruled you. So when now we come as the Muslims or we come as the British, well, we got as much right to rule as you had when you came. So these were histories which were actually developed, designed to suppress people. Some part of that history is still going on. And there are many Indian intellectuals who support that history, which has got no grounding in any historical fact or in any scientific studies. But the old world, let me say, is giving way to the new. A new India is emerging. And to a very large extent, that new India is not really bothered about all these issues. It is a very aspirational India. You're looking ahead. You're not looking at, okay, what happened 100 years ago or 500 years ago. We are looking at, okay, where will we be? Where will we be 50 years from now? Where will we be 100 years from now? And I think that is the vision which is carrying this country forward. It is phenomenal the way people have taken to this. It is not simply a question of making money or something. I have found that, even amongst the poorest sections of society, that desire to do something for the nation, it is a spirit which I have never seen earlier. That it doesn't matter how humble that person is. That man he wants to contribute or she wants to contribute her bit. And when you speak to the school children, you speak to the young girls and the young boys, Aditya, very frankly, there are many times when tears come to my eyes just to see them, to see their thoughts and their views, little kids, and that sense of belonging to, okay, I belong to this nation. India is mine, from the Himalayas down to the oceans, from the east to the west. That very sense of belonging, regardless of the fact that you may have different religions, different food tastes, different climate zones, different languages, but nothing matters. And that is the civilizational ethos which I'm talking about. Those genes which have come from past 15, 20, 30,000 years, those genes cannot be destroyed regardless of which foreign power comes and rules. And I think that is going to be the strength of India. And that is what is going to carry us forward in the years to come. And that is something which will make us a world leader, which other countries will not fear. The rise of China is feared. The rise of India will not be feared by anyone. And that is one guarantee I can give.
That is you're absolutely true. And it looks like India has been unshackled since 2014. Looks like that very clearly to the world also. But the academic world is not changed. Like academic world is continuing with this old narrative because they cannot stop it overnight. And they don't understand India to that extent because they're reading from the viewpoint of the American narrative or the Western narrative. I mean, American narrative is the mainstream narrative of the West. So now one question comes in between. You, in the earlier question, you touched about Russia and Ukraine conflict and how India is not affected by that. India is is affected by that, but doesn't get involved in, doesn't feature in that. It's a European war. You mentioned it's a European war. And that's the right way to classify it. It's happening in that land and it's a European war. But if you look at India's position today, there are many aspects around India, the problems have been created through Western involvement, which is Pakistan was supported by United States for a long time, even recently also. And other parts of the foreign policy of India, many of the things like India not getting access acceptable in United Nations were also some part involved in the Western world also, where they did not support. Now many of them are coming out in support. So if a situation like that comes in to India, any kind of war comes in, how is India prepared for handling it? And you are from the military background, so you can tell much more about it.
You see, when I look at the military threats or the security threats which India faces, we have got a security threat from Pakistan that's on our western borders. We have got one from China that is along the Tibet border. The third threat which we have is from the oceans, along the Indian Ocean. And then there is the fourth threat, which is a very potent threat, that is internal, where people are trying to break your internal cohesion. Now, as far as the threat from Pakistan, the military threat from Pakistan is concerned, that conventional threat is all but over. So Pakistan is no longer a conventional threat to India. They may have nuclear weapons, but as far as I'm concerned, nuclear weapons are, they're hyped. They're hyped a bit too much, and these weapons are simply weapons of deterrence. They are not meant to be used. But I think the Indian state has given a very clear warning or a message. A message is a better word to the Pakistani state or to the Pakistani establishment that India has got a very firm no first use nuclear policy. We will not use nuclear weapons first. And secondly, we will never use nuclear weapons against a power which does not have nuclear weapons. Having said that, the same policy goes on to state that should we be attacked, then there will be massive retaliation. So it isn't that if somebody puts a 20 kT bomb on us, we will retaliate with a 20 kT nuclear bomb. Then that retaliation will be total. Now, I think that message has gone across. So I don't really view the nuclear threat which emanates from Pakistan as a very serious thing. And what Russia is also talking about today of use of nuclear weapons, I don't take them seriously either. It is simply trying to raise temperatures. But militarily, leaving aside the nuclear weapons, militarily, Pakistan is no longer a threat to India. And they have got enough internal security problems of their own to keep them totally occupied. But the larger threat which comes to India as far as Pakistan is concerned is cross-border terrorism. And that is something which I think we have learned to live with for a very long time. It has not been fully resolved yet. But I believe that perhaps in a year or 2 years or 3 or 4 years, this situation will be resolved totally, and we will be able to defang Pakistan completely. So the threat from the western borders is out. Now we come to Tibet and the security threat which comes from China. Now there are two sectors in which we have very serious concerns. One is in eastern Ladakh, and the second is in Arunachal Pradesh. In both these areas, we are sufficiently strong to handle any misadventure by the Chinese. So whether if they attempt to do something, well, I can't stop them. It's a sovereign country; they can do what they want. But then we are a sovereign country too, and we will defend ourselves. And it is up to the Chinese to take a call how far they would like to take that. It has been my considered view that ultimately the battle, as far as if we go to a war with China, the key lies really in space, in outer space, in space, and in the aerospace over the Tibetan plateau. So if you have a strong enough space capability, which we have now to deter the Chinese, if you have a strong enough air force now, which we have over the Tibetan plateau, which can operate, I think the Chinese will be less inclined to go to a full-scale war with India. But they will continue this needling action, which they have been doing for the last many years. And now with the Modi government coming in, every time they do that needling action, they are being resisted. And that is where you see the conflict lines lie. Earlier, that resistance wasn't there. Now there's resistance. And I think at some point of time, the Chinese will get a message that it really won't work. But only thing which I'm certain is, should China wish to go for an all-out war, we are prepared to take them on, because the war will have to be fought in the Tibetan Plateau and on the high Himalayas. We are geared up for that. Many people tell me that the entire Chinese army, they're just so big, etc., etc. I said, listen, the Chinese army has got many other concerns also. Despite their friendship with Russia, they have got concerns against Russia. They've got concerns in the with other countries. They've got concerns with Taiwan. The cross-border straits is a serious concern. Japan is going to be a very serious military threat to China, especially the way Japan is modernizing now. So I'm not too concerned about a Chinese military adventure as of now because we are quite capable of taking it on. And the third area comes as far as the Indian Ocean is concerned. I think it is a very important that India has actually got onto the Quad grouping, and I believe that this Quad grouping will become stronger and stronger. And what the Indian Prime Minister continuously states, that we want free and open navigation on the high seas. I think the four countries cooperating together will ensure that. So that is the third level threat taken over. My concern rather is really with the fourth level. When we're looking internally, we have in the northeast the insurgencies, etc., have been taken care of. The Naxal problem is practically over. Jammu and Kashmir will resolve itself, especially after 370 was removed. Because so long as Article 370 was operative, we could never have resolved this problem. But the larger threat is really there are fifth columnists within the country, what I call the toolkit gang. And there are many in the Western powers who support that toolkit gang, who are looking at a regime change. Many in the West, including in the East, they don't like a strong political authority in Delhi, and they want a regime change because they prefer to deal with a ruler with a political party which they can push and which will follow their dictates. Now, those days are over with the present NDA government led by the Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi. So that is not going to happen. And we will find these toolkit gangs operating now, trying to destabilize this country. My own idea has been build your narrative before they build the narrative and quash it in the bud. We have seen all these narratives developing over the last 5-6 years. Most of these narratives are built on falsehood with a certain element of truth. So they'll put 95% of falsehood and 5% of truth, and then they will try to build a narrative. Those narratives are falling flat now. So this is the last battle which I think India has to win. And none of them, neither our external threats or our internal threats, are going to be a cause really to prevent India from growing at the pace it is. So I'm looking at a very confident India which can handle its problems and which will be a very good force to bring peace and stability in the world.
There are 2-3 thought leaders in the world. One is India, and the yoga is everywhere, practiced by almost like 65 million Americans. In fact, yoga has become the choice of therapy recommended by American doctors. American Medical Association has done it. So soft power is huge in the USA. Everybody knows where the yoga comes from. And I've also contributed by writing a book on that. But another aspect which comes into play is, and I'm really loving our conversation because here we are speaking directly to the mainstream audience here. And also I'm seeing the comments here, a lot of comments are coming in. So one of the things which people love about India are the places like Varanasi, very favorite places of Americans. In fact, in Rishikesh, you'll find more American citizens than sometimes even Indian citizens, especially during the yoga festival days. And these places are becoming a travel itinerary of most of the Americans. You see what happened if you look at the North American continent, the South American continent, there is only one nuclear power, which is USA. No other country, including Canada, doesn't have weapons. So they have kept South America as a backyard, and you saw regime changes, operations in Peru, Brazil, and many other countries, including the riots happening in Mexico also. So the backyard of America is controlled by Americans very clearly, and we control it. I'm part of. So, but if you look at the narrative which is being, you mentioned about narratives a lot, spoken through universities, spoken through global media outlets, and even social media outlets like Facebook, because Facebook controls the media narrative from the US, where they subdue some people from India, subdue some other. So it comes to the fifth dimension, which you're talking about, or fourth dimension, which is the control of voice within India. Most of the Indian youth listen to these channels. They are on these channels. And all these channels, now FBI inquiry has proved in within the US, they are the tools used by the American government to influence changes all over the world. You have seen the example of Burma, where the Burma in Myanmar, where the regime change operations was carried out by a Facebook page or Facebook group. So how does India take that aspect seriously, information security, and also the social media space, because social media space is a tool of the information warfare nowadays?
I think I'll be very frank here. I think for a very long time, India has not performed well in the social media space, especially when we come to the government actions on the subject. You see, America has got a very vibrant public diplomacy wing, and they have been able to influence opinions across the world. India has not been that successful, primarily because I think a large number of people since independence were very firmly aligned with the leftist point of view. And that continued, that lobby, it is very difficult to get rid of those narratives. But that change has started. And there's one thing which I want to tell you about that change. Why I'm not concerned about the social media space now. There are these there is this toolkit operators which are very, very strong in India, and they are being funded from abroad. Right, I've got absolutely no doubts in saying this. The money comes from the United States, it comes from Europe, it comes from China, and it also comes from Pakistan to feed these people. Now, the Indian government response per se, we don't have a parallel response system. But a very strange phenomena has taken place in India. It is the people of India now who have countered it on their own. I have seen a large number of youth, within the 20 to 30 year group, who are spending their own money in countering this propaganda. I'm not talking of one or two individuals. I am talking of individuals in the hundreds of thousands. And nobody has told them to do it. I think what has really happened in India is that amongst the elite, amongst the educated classes, even amongst the normal village folk, that inherent sense of your civilizational ethos and culture, you see, that has never gone away. When I look back into my own life, I studied in a public school all my life. I was influenced tremendously by Western influences. But by the time I was, I was 17 or 18 years old, I shed every bit of those influences. And I didn't require any external agency to tell me why. And I'm seeing that phenomena in the youth of India today. They don't require anybody to tell them. I mean, they know what is right. So for the toolkits to start coming into India and changing systems, they've got an uphill battle because they are not fighting now against the government, which is very easy to fight against. They are now fighting against the people of India. And that is going to be something which they will not be able to break. You cannot break the will of a billion plus people. That is one. Though of course, I understand that within that billion, there are a large number of supporters who want to get back to power, back to the government again. They've been out of power now for about 8 to 10 years now, 9 years. They want to get back, and they are tying up with these forces. So that's okay. That's part of the game, but that will be handled. But this narrative building, which I think it's a very important thing. In my personal view, India needs to have, at the center, we need to build up this organization. I have been advocating personally, we have a national security advisor, Mr. Doval, who's done a brilliant job in the last few years, last 8 years, ever since Mr. Modi became the prime minister in 2014. I think we need a national information advisor also now. You see, this narrative has become the main form of changing opinions. And it is a new form of warfare now. And unless we start changing narratives and getting people onto our narrative or telling them what the truth is, it's not going to work. In my lectures, I give a quotation, to all the people who listen to my lectures. And I always invariably quote that African proverb. And that proverb says, unless the lions get their own historian, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. They're a very deep word. Who is talking? Who is giving the narrative? When, as a child, when I used to read about the Vietnam War, I used to think every Vietnamese should be killed. That is the level of the narrative which had been built, that every Vietnamese is evil. The Americans have come there to do good, and even if they have to kill every single Vietnamese there, we used to applaud it. My ideas have changed now. You see, I mean, I understand Americans were working on their geopolitical interests, but for God's sake, the Vietnamese were fighting for their freedom. Now, that is something which, when we are looking at narratives, this is the narrative which India has to build. The External Affairs Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, is doing it very well. When across the world, on every platform, he says, India is not going to look after American interests or Russian interests. India is going to look after India's interests. But more important than Jaishankar's voice, I think it is the voice of the common citizen of India. Even when you're looking into the schoolgirls and the schoolboys, etc., these young kids, they've got that very firmly implanted in their mind. Having said that, in India today, amongst the people of India, the amount of goodwill which they have for the people of America, it is something which I find very, very astonishing. So, obviously, the people-to-people goodwill remains. The narrative, I think, as far as India is concerned, we need to change that narrative and to tell the American think tanks, especially the American deep state, listen, enough is enough. Stop interfering in our affairs, and we'll get on pretty well together. I think that is the message which actually has to go across if it hasn't gone across.
See, at one point of time, human rights was used as a big stick by all the narrative agencies, and Native Americans who look like you and me, like we have similar skin, brown skin, and who are the natives of this land before the European settlers came. And European settlers are not more than 8 generations old. I mean, this country is 8 to 9 generations old maximum. But the power which came was in 1908, not before that. 1924, the American Constitution was revalidated. And 1924, Native Americans were given citizenship of America. That's an established fact, 1924. So very recent. And even today, there are 573 tribal nations in the US. And many of them we are talking, and my book was there, very popular with them, Gold, Glory, and God. And where I have put a narrative from an Indian perspective in that book to teach the American academics. So one question comes in. So many of these tribal nations, they participated in 2016 with Sushma Swaraj's conference, that she was a foreign minister of India. She was a very powerful foreign minister of India. And she had organized a conference where she had invited all these people to India. And that was taken up in a very negative way. But India has made the first step by recognizing the identity of these Native Americans, which no other country has done in the world. India has done for the first time. So do you think that India will ever expand the global South definition and include these oppressed communities also? Because they have been put into reservations, and reservations are it's like a glorified jail. Nothing grows there, it's the rocks over there. Do you think that Indian Foreign Ministry will take a notice of this also? One point.
Very frankly, I think India may talk about it in a forum here or there, but I think for the moment, India's interest is to really sort out our own house. You see, India's voice will become more and more powerful as the days go by if we are economically strong enough and militarily strong enough to implement what we want to do. Now, unless you have that, very frankly, that Gandhian notion only works in foreign policy if you've got the guns and the economy behind it. Today, Japan is a very powerful country economically, but it doesn't have the military muscle, and neither does Germany. Where does the voice count? Let me get you back to the Ukraine war. Europe has been subjugated totally by the Americans. The European security now is hostage to America because they have not bothered to build up their own power. So if you don't have your own power, where are you going to get the authority to speak for the less fortunate? If you look into a classroom and there is a young, strong boy who can look after himself, then he can tell the school bully not to beat the small children. But if he himself is small and getting beaten up, then what authority does he have? I mean, how will anybody even go to him for help? I think for India to speak for the oppressed people of the world, we may talk about it, yes, But to take it up on a serious note, I'm very doubtful. I think what we need to do is to sort out the poverty levels within India itself. Become a strong nation first. Become a strong Indian nation. We have a civilizational ethos which has caught on across the country. We still have got many miles to travel economically and militarily. Especially, we've got many miles to travel as far as getting onto advanced technologies are concerned, because that is where the future lies. But we will get there. And I think once we get there, our voice will be heard and it will be respected. And that is the time when perhaps we are in a better position to help out other people. I'm not saying that we ignore it totally. If the issue comes up, I think India's hand will always be raised in support. But for India to take the initiative and start doing, going out and doing something, I personally don't see that happening as of now.
See, one of the important aspects of warfare, and Narad Muni tells Yudhishthir, is you need to fight the wars on the enemy's land. Very clearly, Narad Muni says to Yudhishthir, which is mentioned in Mahabharata, asks Yudhishthir that, do you do that? Yudhishthir says, I do that. So it's a very common thing in known. And the first arm of the war during the, very few people read Mahabharata nowadays, but because I write books on Mahabharata, so I know very few. The first step of the warfare for Yudhishthir was intelligence. They used to infiltrate the foreign governments and make sure that their interest, which was Sanatan Dharma, was protected. Because Sanatan Dharma, according to Yudhishthir, brings peace for everybody. It recognizes everybody. So, but the modern concept, which has come from, it's an Aristotelian thought coming from his book, The Republic, Constitutional Republics, which is built on a small nation state concept, which is a European concept. Aristotelian thought, he was a Greek philosopher. Now, that thought says just protect the boundaries and should expand the boundaries of the nation states, but keep the nation states small. That has been the European mindset generally. So in any war, I mean, if you look at the information warfare and including Silicon Valley companies, now many reports have come out which have been publicly widely sold books in the US, where they mentioned that many of the Silicon Valley companies were promoted by the intelligence agencies, and they were used for controlling the narrative. Now, this is aspect of warfare. How did an Indian or has the Indian security, a strategic establishment, recognize that the importance of it?
When we are looking at intelligence operations and information warfare, I think these are absolutely critical as far as warfare is concerned. And if you fail on this particular aspect, both in intelligence and in creating an appropriate narrative, I'm afraid that we're not going to win that war. Information warfare, it encompasses many aspects. Psychological warfare really becomes the narrative as part of the overall IW concept. Right, and so is the cyber domain, the psychological domain, etc., is all part of the IW domain, the information warfare domain. So that is critical. I think, very frankly, I'm not very sure how well India has worked on this particular aspect. There is certainly a realization in the strategic community and in the military and administrative and the political hierarchy that this is a very important aspect, and which is why our foreign policy now is really geared towards that, to presenting the Indian narrative. The first steps really started in creating an awareness of what India is. And that was started when Sushma Swaraj became the foreign minister, when she went across and she went out to the diaspora and told them, we are proud to have you people. You see, and that was the time when the first, the imprint of Indian culture, like yoga, it started going across the world. Otherwise, India was very hesitant to tell people that, okay, this is what we are. But in 2014, with the efforts of the Prime Minister and Sushma Swaraj as the External Affairs Minister, that changed, and that momentum has taken pace a great deal. But on the intelligence front, very frankly, we had many years earlier, well before, I think it's 3 to 4 decades earlier, we had a Prime Minister of India who didn't believe in all this stuff, you see. And then how are you going to address those issues? Because when you have prime ministers at the helm of policy who say that, listen, We want to be friends with everybody, but we don't want to have an apparatus like an intelligence apparatus, and they start winding things down, then I think that creates a problem because other countries are not operating in the same manner. Those things, that is history now. So I think as far as our own external intelligence agencies and our internal intelligence agencies are concerned, in my view, they are doing a remarkable job today, especially internally. I can see the way we have eliminated a large number of threats from occurring. We have had hundreds of bomb blasts by now. All of that is history. It is not happening now. It is not happening not because those people don't want to do it. It is because our intelligence agencies are now on top. And while you can have, like just today, there was a bomb blast in Jammu. You see, 6 people were injured. I can understand it cannot be stopped 100%. But to a very large extent, we have been able to control it. Externally, I think we are not badly off. But if you want to compare ourselves with the level of, say, what the United States does, no. I think we are very, very far from that. The US has got a very well-oiled machine as part of its narrative building, as part of its public diplomacy. And they use every single means, including NGOs, to further that interest, which is why the India has also felt a requirement to put a curb on these NGOs and to sort of look into their funding, which many people are now saying that it is a matter of intolerance, but it is simply in accordance with Indian laws. So we know the game which is being played. We are trying to curb it, and let's see if we can actually build up our own capability to the extent we desire. But we are doing, while we are not a leader in this field, I don't think we are doing badly at all.
You correctly mentioned that US aid is a State Department. It's a department. The US aid is their department, and that's how they promote NGOs through third parties. Like sometimes Clinton's foundations work, sometimes foundations based in Sweden work on their behalf. So it's a collective vest against a common interest of not letting any other economy or nation come up as a future challenge. That's the whole philosophy. And it's very glad to hear what you're telling me, that it is not possible in today's scenario. My last question to you: you have touched so many important issues with such clarity. So how does this clarity come in? Because we know you have a lot of experience, 40 plus years of service experience, and you have served the nation, so India, and also you're part of think tank also. But the clarity that you bring to this subject, what is the source of that clarity?
Very frankly, as an army chap, you're trained to shoot. I'm not a diplomat. A diplomat will couch his words in a very nice language. I mean, I just say it straight. And even when while in service, my father was a very outspoken officer, and I think perhaps that outspokenness comes. It is part of the family trait. But even after I left service, I joined a think tank. I was the director of the Indian Army's think tank. And then later, once I left that, I'm in another think tank now, which is very, which deals in a great way with the security and international relations, and also with culture. I'm with India Foundation, and it gives me an opportunity to meet with people at the highest level in government, in politics, and in the military. And I think when you are in a position to just interact, and even if you don't say a word, if you're just listening into what other people are saying, it makes a great deal of a difference. So you interact with the Chinese, with the Russians, with the Americans, with the Brits, with the French, with the Germans, with anybody, and it makes a huge difference. You interact with your neighbors in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. You interact with the Afghans. You hear their viewpoint. They ask you a question, and I will give you a similar response the way I've given you. I mean, for me, there is nothing hidden. I'm not a part of government. I don't have any state secrets. So nobody can actually say that, okay, you have violated so-and-so code or something. I'm just saying everything which I have from my own personal experience, and everything is there in the open domain. These are views. What is fact? I think, if a large body of students are viewing this, I think they must understand that what I'm stating is one point of view. If you have a person with a leftist orientation, that person, she or he may have another point of view. Listen to them also. I've got no problems with that. But my only thing is, I tell people, please make up your own mind. Don't get swayed by propaganda. Today on the social media, there is so much propaganda that 95% you can just leave and say, okay, it is propaganda. I mean, it is so evident. It is so poorly done. For the Americans, one thing I'll give credit to them, they do their propaganda very well. It is very subtle, like the British propaganda, very subtle. The Chinese and the Russian propaganda, it's out in the open, and they throw it at your face. The Western world is much more subtle. I think in India also, we are cultivating the subtlety. But you need to be direct and honest also and tell them, listen, we are a growing economy. We are still, nobody is claiming that India is a superpower. We are far from that. We are economically, we have a long way to go. We have millions who are well below the poverty line. But all of them will get there. We will be out of poverty. I've got no doubts about it. And we will be a thriving nation. And the most important point, Aditya, I must tell you, when we are a thriving nation, I can assure you, we will not be a threat to anybody else.
Everybody knows that. Indians, like such a soft power in USA, I can see that every community trusts Indian Americans. One last question. Like, for example, if you see the Russia-US war, the biggest surprise for the West is the amount of weapons and the ammunition that Russia can always up the ante. Like they can bring it even better. Like I'm just surprised that people initially were surprised with Kinzhal missiles. And now suddenly Russian military and artillery is just pumping up and up and up. It shows their industrial power. Assuming that because the West wants to do regime change in India very clearly, if that situation comes in, will Indian military industry, be able to sustain a very long-term operation?
You see, when we're looking at a long-term military operation, I don't think a war is going to be used by any power outside India to carry out a regime change. They will use internal tools, they will use toolkits, and enough of them are going around. In fact, even the BBC documentary, which has come out recently, going back to, talking about it is laughable. They're talking about the riots which took place in 2002. It is laughable, but that is part of the toolkit. So those are the ones which actually we will have to be concerned about. If we are looking at a war, a long war, let us say with Pakistan, I'm not so much concerned as to how long it lasts, because Pakistan doesn't have the ability to sustain it. But as far as India is concerned, we keep the amount of the ammunition and weapons which are required over to sustain it for a period of time. There is a rate fixed out for high contact and for normal contact. The different stages of the war. So if it is going to be is going to be very intense operations, then for those intense operations, we will say we will keep our reserves for 20 days or 30 days. And if it is going to be for contact, we will keep reserve for 20 days or say about 60 days or whatever. Those rates are laid down. And equipment which is not available easily, those rates are much higher. So that means if we find that there is a particular type of equipment which we may not get in a short time, then we may keep 6 months reserves. There is no ruling as far as that is concerned that the policy planners do. And we have enough time in the industry so that before those resources get utilized, we will be able to replenish them either internally or from outside sources. Today, the Indian military industrial complex has been revitalized. It is still in the process. It is still rising, because we had never given the power to the private sector. But that power has been given now. We will see the power of India's private sector in the defense field growing by the day. And I think if we go about a decade from now, today when we import about 50 to 60% of our requirements, that will go down to about 10 to 15%. No country is self-sufficient in everything, but we will reduce our dependence on foreign imports to a very, very great extent, because we have now the military industrial complex, which is coming up. It is not really established. It is coming up. We have got 2 defense corridors, one in UP and one in Tamil Nadu. And once these are operational, I have a feeling within the next 5 to 10 years, they will be fully operational. There will be a whole range of manufacturing taking place in India as far as defense components are concerned. And that will see us through. But even if it's a long war, the other party also, we know what they can bring to the table. So we will handle it as and when it comes.
I mean, thank you for this wide-ranging discussion. We went from everything from policy to intelligence to the future of the military-industrial complex and toolkit gang also. And thank you so much for giving your time. And I really value this discussion because many of the people have heard for the first time in my audience, and they've heard because they most of these are students and they have heard it for the first time that how an Indian think tank operates or they think in terms of their own security. So people are surprised. I'm seeing a lot of surprise icons everywhere because they never heard an Indian viewpoint because that is the American mainstream media. And I've stopped watching it for last 5 years now because it's a just as party positions. Like one party talks about Democrats, one channel talks about Republicans. And it's there is a truth somewhere in the middle, like you said correctly, that we have to start not listening to them because it's just a propaganda. So thank you so much for coming on the show, and would like to welcome you again whenever you have time. And for all the viewers who are watching, do share widely and let us know your feedback. Namaste.
Thank you, Ditya. All the best.
Thank you.